Thanks for joining us on this Monday. I'm Elizabeth Pran. Leland has the day off this holiday week. But first tonight, Trump's long and lengthy wish list. In his first true campaign-style speech since he won re-election, the president-elect laid out a monster list of plans and priorities. Did you see it? He talked about everything from taking back the Panama Canal to saving the Chinese-owned app TikTok. If you missed the speech, here's a recap.
Who the hell can have spirit? Watching women get beat up in a boxing ring? I don't think that's spirit, right? We're going to end that one quick. We're going to end it very quickly. We're going to advertise how bad drugs are for you, how bad they are. They ruin your look, they ruin your face, they ruin your skin, and ruin your teeth. Nobody's done that before, and we're going to do it. If the principles, both moral and legal, of this magnanimous gesture of giving are not followed, then we will demand that the Panama Canal be returned to the United States of America in full, quickly, and without question. And woke has to stop, because along with everything else, it's destroying our country. We did go on TikTok, and we had a great response with billions of views, billions and billions of views. They brought me a chart, and it was a record, and it was so beautiful to see. And as I looked at it, I said, maybe we got to keep this sucker around a little while. You know? With a stroke of my pen on day one, we're going to stop the transgender lunacy. And we will keep men out of women's sports. And that will likewise be done on day one. Should I do day one, day two, or day three? How about day one, right?
All right, and just like the big man himself, the president-elect has a lot to do. He's checking his list twice. In fact, in the past 72 hours, it's shown us anything. It's what a second Trump term may just look like. Now, Trump did suffer a major defeat on Capitol Hill. He ran out to the cameras to claim what he said was a victory when it comes to paper reduction, and he made a ton of promises that he likely won't be able to keep because many, of course, do need congressional buy-in. And we're not exactly sure if buying Greenland is top of mind for millions of Americans who do say they voted for Trump because they're living paycheck to paycheck, not to mention it's really not on the market. But one of Trump's biggest promises during the election was mass deportations. And he renewed that pledge this weekend while once again comparing some migrants to a fictional serial killer.
The fact is that we don't want Hannibal Lecter. You know what that is? Silence of the Lambs. We don't want Hannibal Lecter, Dr. Hannibal Lecter in our country, do we, huh?
But as far as deportations go, Trump's plan undoubtedly will face legal challenges. But there's also new polling that shows he could face some backlash in the court of public opinion. A new Washington Post poll finds the majority of Americans oppose using the U.S. military to carry out mass deportations of illegal immigrants. But if Trump doesn't get his way through executive order, he will have to go through Congress. And as Delaware Senator Chris Coons pointed out, Republicans are going to have a hard time implementing Trump's agenda with a very razor-thin majority and a fracturing party in itself.
We're not just going to have President-elect Trump as a billionaire rage tweeting at 4 a.m. We're going to have Elon Musk also injecting instability into how we tackle very complicated and important issues for our country. And while there's going to be a majority with an R next to their name in the House and the Senate and a Republican in the White House, what we saw over the last couple of days is that they don't agree with each other.
So buckle up, America. The next 4 years may not be smooth sailing, and there's still a very real chance the president-elect won't get everything on his Christmas list. He may have to walk away with a little bit of coal. But we do begin tonight with Corey Lewandowski, senior advisor for Trump's 2024 campaign. Corey, thank you so much for joining us. A ton to pick apart, right? So let's start with the first 100 days. The president-elect said that he's anticipating an extraordinary first 100 days. Your predictions, what's front and center right now for you?
Well, Merry Christmas. First, front and center for the Trump administration, which is going to start 4 weeks from today, as a matter of fact. is going to be to seal the border. And that's a promise that the president has campaigned on from the very beginning. Look, we cannot be a nation if we've got an open border crisis. We're the only civilized country that doesn't have a situation where we can control our own border. So sealing the border and making sure we know who is coming in. That doesn't mean we don't let people in, but it means we vet them and we get the best and the brightest coming forth. The second thing on that first 100 days is going to start deporting the criminals, the 13,099 convicted murderers who are in this country, the almost 17,000 rapists, and the 425,000 people who have criminal convictions who are here illegally. In addition to that, we've got about 1.5 million people who have final deportation orders, meaning they've gone through all of the court process and they've been told that they must leave this country, but they continue to stay here. So when you look at what Tom Homan is going to do, we're going to start that deportation from the worst people in our country who don't belong here anymore. And then the other thing that Donald Trump has to do in the first 100 days is we've got to work with Congress to start providing some relief. Relief at the gas pumps, relief at the grocery store, so that Americans can have more money in their pockets to get back on their feet after the 4 long years of the Biden administration.
Okay, there's other topics that I want to get to, but I do want to stay with immigration. We had some horrific news over the weekend, some crimes on the subway there where a immigrant allegedly lighting a woman on fire. Does this give you confirmation? Does this give the president-elect confirmation that this is what he essentially was elected for?
Well, you're exactly right. And look, this is a person who has been flagged already, allegedly, for being in this country illegally, who shouldn't have been here, who should have been deported already. But because of the sanctuary city policies that a number of these cities have, and by being soft on crime, these individuals took this poor woman's life who was simply on the subway. She fell asleep, and this animal lit her on fire and then watched her from a bench burn to death. If that is not masochistic, then nothing is. And people like that don't belong in our society. They don't belong in any society.
All right, I want to backtrack a little bit because the president-elect and Elon Musk were in the headlines, right? We talked about the CR, what happened. Even the WSJ said the budget, they called it a budget fiasco, right? You didn't hear that coming from the president-elect. I do want to play a soundbite for you because we have seen Elon Musk with him quite a bit making headlines. Here's what the president said about his appearances with the billionaire.
They're on a new kick. Russia, 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 Ukraine, 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 all the different hoaxes. And the new one is President Trump has ceded the presidency to Elon Musk. No, that's not happening.
All right, Corey, you've known the president-elect for quite some time. He's not known for sharing a stage. Would you argue he's sharing a stage now?
Well, what he's doing is he's surrounding himself with really smart people, and he's using them to his advantage in a positive way. Look, what did Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and Vice President designee Vance do? They went to Capitol Hill and said this bill that had 1,547 pages, which was bloated with pork and spending, is not going to pass. And the group of Doge that's going to be tasked with looking at saving our taxpaying dollars hit the alarm button. And what happened? The Republicans ultimately killed that bill. They passed a bill that was about 20 or 21 pages, much more succinct. It didn't have this spending on it. But what it said was, we're not going to give $50 billion to pharmaceutical industries at the expense of taxpayers. And so, listen, what Elon is doing, what Vivek is doing, what J.D. Vance is doing, they're working with President Trump to make sure that the best legislation can get passed so that American taxpaying dollars aren't being wasted. It's great to have smart people surrounding the president.
Yesterday, we saw him. This was really his first campaign style, or you'd say president-elect, his first speech, his rally-like speech as president-elect. And I do want to bring up a number of issues. We heard him saying that he was going to take down DEI. We talked about gender identity, lunacy. But Corey, we've seen him be a little bit softer. Let's say if you look at Time Magazine's piece, we've heard him on the campaign trail. He said he's going to be ending some of this lunacy with a stroke of a pen. Can you clear some of that up for us? What can we expect when it comes to transgender in sports, when it comes to the transgender lunacy, the bathroom issue? There's a lot of issues that people are still sort of confused about.
Yeah, and the truth is, even the president of the United States has limitations of what he can and cannot do. Now, as it relates to right. Transgender issues and DEI issues in the military, I think we're going to see Pete Hegseth rid our native, our military fighting force of that DEI criteria. I think that's very important. But that being said, we saw Charlie Baker, who's the head of the NCAA, on Capitol Hill last week, continuing to allow men to be in women's sports. And when pressed on that issue, why do we have girls' sports if men can continue to play in them? He really didn't have an answer. And when you look at what some of these strong women have been doing, using their voices, particularly girls volleyball, recently, to say it's not fair that men are competing and these grown men are in our women's locker rooms. Look, I don't think there's any parent in America that wants to see their 17-year-old girl in a locker room with a 21-year-old man. I just don't think that's the case. I've got a daughter. I would be appalled by that. And so, listen, President Trump has brought this issue to the forefront, will continue to put pressure on people. There is a way to compete in sports. Title IX was designed so women have equal opportunities to compete. We should never forget that. But if you are a biological male, you should be competing against biological males. The president's talked about that very clearly, and I think he'll do everything in his power to make sure that that's the case going forward.
Well, and we see a shift, right, with the Biden administration. Corey, I only have about 30 seconds left. I do want to ask you with one quick question. We hear about the possibility of Greenland, obviously not for sale, the Panama Canal. Corey, do voters care about either of those issues, or do we want him focusing on the price of eggs?
Look, of course, all politics is local, which means the economy is the most important thing. But Donald Trump is looking at a legacy here over the next 4 years of what he can do to fundamentally transform the United States once again and leave a lasting impression. If the United States, the strategic value of Greenland cannot be overstated, how important that is from a strategic, economic, military side. And when it comes to the Panama Canal, that's something that the United States took enormous pains to build. And then to turn that over and have such enormous Chinese influence in it is a real tragedy. And so looking at that once again and the impact that America is going to lead from the front puts the world on notice that we have a new leader coming in 4 weeks.
On that note, Corey Lewandowski, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful holiday week. Thank you for joining us tonight.
You too. Thank you.
Coming up, Elon Musk proposes weight loss drugs to Americans to make them healthy again. Why one state experiment shows that Musk may be right, and perhaps the feds need to help with these skyrocketing drug prices. Stay with us. On his way out the door, President Biden said he wanted to make weight loss drugs available to every American who may need them. So what does that mean for so many who take the drug when the administration changes? Certainly members of Team Trump have said that they want to do that and more, even proposing hypothetical lower prices and more access. So will President-elect Trump follow through? Defender depends on who has his ear, for certain. On one hand, there's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who thinks the best way to make America healthy again is through diet and lifestyle and not weight loss drugs.
We're spending $1,600 a month on this drug. There's a bill right now before Congress that will make it available to everybody who's overweight, which is 74% of the American population. That alone will cost $3 trillion a year. If we spent about 1/5 of that giving good food, 3 meals a day, to every man, woman, and child in our country, we could solve the obesity and diabetes epidemic overnight.
On the other hand, you have Elon Musk, who thinks accessible weight loss drugs would solve everything. He, quote, says, nothing would do more to improve the health, lifespan, and quality of life for Americans than making GLP inhibitors super low cost to the public. Nothing else is even close. Let's bring in Director of Medical Weight Management, West Virginia University, Dr. Laura Davison, who watched an experimental program play out in West Virginia where employees did get access to cheap GLP-1 drugs and what it did. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. Quickly, tell us the impact that it had.
Hi, thank you for having me. So I run the Medical Weight Management program here at WVU in Morgantown, West Virginia. And the program was a statewide program that offered GLP-1 medications as part of a comprehensive program statewide. And I run the Morgantown program. The results we saw were incredible. Our patients lost 15% of their weight. They had improvement in multiple health conditions, including their blood pressure, their hemoglobin A1Cs, which is a marker of diabetes, their cholesterol. They were able to come off of certain medications. They were able to do more and feel better. And overall, they just had incredible health benefits. And I think this could be a remarkable tool that could really help our state because we're in West Virginia with the #1 rate of obesity.
Well, and I'm looking at some numbers. As you mentioned, according to the West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources, the obesity rate is almost 42% in your state. We look at some of these prices, Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy. I mean, it's around $1,000, if not more, a month. That is simply something that folks cannot afford. So can you tell me the program, if it was so successful, why was it taken away?
Obviously, these medications have a very high price tag. We understand that. And we understand that the state employee insurance program was struggling with costs. So we are not expecting them to expand the program. That is understandable. But if you want to be financially responsible, they already invested millions of dollars in treating patients in this pilot program. It was a small number of people. All the people in this program were just treated at these very limited centers of excellence. And if we stop the program now and let these people who got treated regain their weight, and we don't follow their outcomes long term and see what the potential benefits are, that's not financially responsible. We need to keep these people on treatment and see what the long-term outcomes are, because potentially this could be part of the solution to their financial problems. If it turns out that treating this obesity aggressively could actually help turn around the health of the state and maybe reduce all the costs of the taking care of their health.
Well, that leads me to my next question is how do you not know that it didn't offset the cost of the drug by alleviating some of these other health costs?
Yeah, I think a lot of these health problems are going to take years for us to really see the benefits. And you know, that clip from RFK Jr. was interesting. You know, we do know that eating healthy is a part of this and exercising is a part of this, but there's a difference between prevention and treatment. We have the highest rate of obesity in our state, and we also have a high severity level of obesity. We have patients walking into our clinic who are 600-700 pounds. And when the state employee insurance cut off this program, you know, they offered patients in exchange a gym membership. I think everyone knows that if you have someone who's 600 or 700 pounds, a gym membership is not going to be able to treat their obesity effectively. Exercise, eating healthy can help with prevention perhaps, but a patient who has that severity level of obesity needs treatment. They need something more than a gym membership. They probably can't even move and exercise at that point.
You know, quickly, can I just get your takeaway? What was your takeaway from this year that you witnessed? So, you know, I think we know that a lot of insurance companies across the country are struggling with this. It's not just this particular insurance company. And what we tell a lot of insurance companies is this is probably the exact kind of program they need to implement, where you let certain centers of excellence who are experts in treating obesity prescribe under very controlled circumstances, where patients get all of the dietary counseling, all of the exercise counseling and lifestyle to go along with the prescription. And that's exactly what they did in this program. So we need to carry this through, see what the long-term results are, because this could potentially be a model for other insurance companies who are struggling with costs to say, this is how you can actually implement coverage of these drugs in a very responsible way. Yeah, Laura Davison, thank you so much for joining us. The pilot program was unbelievable. It was really interesting to read about. Thank you so much for joining us on this holiday week. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up, Joe Biden commutes the sentences of 37 convicted murderers sitting on death row. Some crimes are almost too horrific to recount, and 2 days before Christmas. Now imagine being one of those family members of the victims. Biden's goodbye tour just gets a little bit worse for Democrats. We'll have that story coming up. It's no secret Democrats are in the middle of an identity crisis. Even top lawmakers admit that there does need to be a change. But the president may be making it a little bit tougher for them. Imagine what Christmas is going to be like for the families of those who were murdered by one of the 37 inmates whose death sentences were commuted by the president today. Take the Roberts family. 12-year-old Lexis K. Roberts was held captive by Thomas Sanders. He had just killed her mother, and Lexis was shot 4 times, and she was left in the woods for the police to find. Thomas is one of the inmates who Biden took off death row. There's also the Donovan family. Alice Donovan was headed to Walmart to do some Christmas shopping for her daughters, but she never made it. 2 men kidnapped her in the parking lot. Her remains were not found for 7 years. So both killers will now live out their days behind bars when she couldn't make it home from a shopping run. So many families without loved ones, yet those convicted of heinous crimes have access to food, shelter, water, in some cases education, other amenities. Americans are already frustrated with President Biden and the Democratic Party. A new focus group from Navigator Research described the Democratic Party as an ostrich because, quote, they've got their heads in the sand and are absolutely committed to their own ideas, even when they're failing. Another likened the party to koalas who, quote, are complacent and lazy about getting policy wins that we really need. Someone else said that Democrats are just not a friend of the working class anymore. Is that true? With us now is Brett Manley, top advisor to Republican members for well over 15 years, and Lisa Durden, Democratic political analyst. Lisa, I do want to start with you. The optics, I mean, it's up for interpretation. There are a number of men who are still on death row. I have a list here. We've got Dylan Roof. We have the Boston Marathon bomber, Robert Bowers. Do you think this was a good move, a sensitive move toward Christmas, or do you think the optics aren't great for the Democratic Party?
Well, it's always good to do a good thing. Let me just start by saying this. All of you MAGA minions and you megalomaniacs and MAGA monsters are the so-called evangelicals who believe in God. And God says, forgive. Now, I understand lots of people are victims of all kinds of heinous crimes, and I can't stand it. But people who are evangelicals, people who are Christians, people who claim they believe in God should not feel like a person has the right to kill someone, even if they were also victims or their families were. So do I agree with Joe Biden commuting 37 death row inmates to keep them in jail for life? I absolutely do. One of the other reasons why I agree with it is because I'm a black person. And I know the death penalty harms more black people than anyone else. So I can't feel good when real heinous killers have a death penalty and then maybe a black person gets a death penalty who's innocent. Either you believe in the death penalty or you don't. And I don't. But he did not let them out of prison. He said, you will not go to the death penalty, and I'm going to spare your life, and you're going to spend the rest of your life in jail. Now, the criminal in chief, Donald Trump, would not want to do that when he got in office. So I'm glad that Joe Biden commuted those sentences before Donald Trump got in office, because that would be a disaster.
All right, Brett, I want you to respond. I want you to respond to Lisa. And then I have a question that I want to add, not only your response, but is this a move by President Biden, or is this a move by the Democratic machine? Who's making this decision, the Democratic machine or President Biden?
Yeah, well, I mean, first I'd like to clarify, the faith community actually does support the Clemencies, I think, in this situation, but they're taking it from a moral standpoint. And if your moral position is that you don't support the death penalty, that's certainly a case you can make. But then why leave those other men on death row? If those crimes that those men are committed are so heinous that they deserve to die, why is it that the men whose sentences were commuted don't deserve to die? Why is it that the Boston Marathon bomber deserves to die, but someone who raped and murdered a 7- and 8-year-old girl deserves to be put on clemency? You can't have it both ways. If you want to make the moral case, right, that the death penalty is bad, then make the moral case and commute all the sentences. But what Biden's done here is really put the Democratic Party in a position where they have to both defend why those men need to die, but also at the same time defend why another group of people who have committed absolutely heinous crimes should not die. And that's a very difficult position for them to be in. And I think as you look going forward, a lot of the problems that the Democratic Party had campaigning about trying to have it both ways, right? Tax the rich, but we're going to forgive their student loans. Things like that. You have to be consistent, and this is not consistent. So if you want to make the moral case, I personally don't think that you should give these men clemency. They committed heinous crimes. The voters in many of these states have had opportunities to repeal the death penalty, and they have not done so. California being one of those states, very liberal state, routinely votes against repealing the death penalty. But this is clearly something that the president has the power to do. I don't necessarily think it's wise, right, because he doesn't get credit for clemency from the groups that advocate for it, since he's clearly left men on death row. And now you've left the question, what crime do you think deserves death? And now you have people comparing, and that's not a situation where I think the Democrats want to be in, where they have to defend certain decisions against other ones when those decisions would conflict with each other.
Well,
Lisa, I want to play a quick, go ahead.
No, I don't think other people outside of the president gets to tell the president what to do. You're going to always have online chatter about what the president should not have done. They're not the president. President Biden had the power to pardon or to grant clemency. We don't know the details behind why some got clemency and some didn't, but I'm with you. I think President Biden should not only give them all clemency and get off of death row, he should, now we need President Biden to pardon former Baltimore City's state attorney, Marilyn Mosby. He needs to pardon her. She was railroaded and she was innocent. So Joe Biden signed her application because she put an application in, and we want her out as well. Do it all for them before we get the megalomaniac in the office. So I agree with you. If you're a Christian, you should want everybody to be out. No one should be on death row, period.com. That's it.
Okay, Brett, I want to give you the last word here. We have about 45 seconds left. You brought up a point about the Democrats being wanting it both ways. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Kamala Harris campaigned on strengthening the border, enforcing the border, making it a strict border control. But at the same time, you have Democrats everywhere saying, well, we're proudly sanctuary cities. Those things conflict with each other. You can't be the party that says we want to ban guns unless you're the president's son, and then we're going to pardon him for gun crimes. Voters see these kinds of things, right? And they look at this decision here, right? And they say, okay, these two things conflict with each other. You either oppose the death penalty or you don't. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to ask the president those questions. He could clear a lot of this up, right, by sitting down and having the news media ask questions about it, which is something I think President Trump is obviously willing to do. I mean, just the other day, he held an hour and a half long press conference. We need to hear from the president on these kinds of things because pardon power, clemency power is so absolute. And there's nothing anybody can do about it. This is within the purview of the presidency of the United States. And whether you like that or not, Joe Biden has the ability to make this decision. But I also think he should answer the questions about why the decision was made in this way. And I don't know if we're going to get those answers.
And Donald Trump is going to have the ability to do that when he gets into office, and he's already promised to grant people pardon those individuals who were there at January 6th. So when he gets in, we'll have that conversation. But in the meantime, President Biden's the president, not Kamala Harris, and that's the discussion of the day.
Well, so typically at the end of a term, when it's December, we seem to have these conversations. As Brett mentioned, all presidents have every time, right? So Brett and Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. I knew it would be a lively debate, and of course you delivered. I appreciate that, and have a wonderful holiday week.
Happy holidays.
Speaking of holiday week, thank you. Don't let Uncle Jack or Aunt Mary ruin your Christmas dinner with all that political talk. When we come back, we have a guide to keeping Democrats in disarray and Trump and Elon Musk just away from your holiday celebration. So stay with us. Of Americans think the holidays are a sacred time to put all political differences aside. In fact, 72% hope that they can just avoid political conversations altogether, and 38% plan to stay away from those who they simply can't agree with. Our next guest, Thomas Farley, also known as Mr. Manners, is an etiquette expert, and he joins us now. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us. First and foremost, if we have this 83% polling, then why do we always have this conversation? It appears it always comes up.
It always comes up. And, for many of us, we actually had a dress rehearsal for this at Thanksgiving. And now here we are just a couple of weeks later in familiar territory. Perhaps family members we didn't get to see over Thanksgiving. But I think to your question, this year, most likely more than other years, I think we as a country are feeling more divided and perhaps just worn out from the cycle we've just been through. So we can pretty much count on butting heads with at least one or two family members or friends.
Okay, but I read this really amazing Vox piece. It said family members are not morally bound to each other, but nobody wants human suffering. Do we have to remind ourselves that essentially we are more alike than we are not? Is that right?
I think it's a great point. And, I'm not someone who says we should never discuss politics. We should never discuss issues. And in fact, if you have family members who think differently from you, it's perhaps important for you to be able to engage with them in a considerate, respectful way. However, the holidays are a time to really be celebrating other things than people's politics, whatever we think about them. So I think there are some key ways to avoid those difficult conversations and maybe save those face-to-face respectful conversations for another occasion besides the holidays.
Okay, so what are those key ways? How do you redirect?
Sure, yeah. So for starters, as host, your host should really put out there, you're going to nip this in the bud and you're going to put it out there in your invitation. I realize as host, we have many different family members with many different political views. I'd like to request that everyone simply keep politics at least away from the table for the occasion, but ideally away from the occasion entirely. So you're going to put that out there as host. That's your prerogative. Next.
Okay, and if it gets brought up, you start. Go ahead.
Yeah, and when we're focusing on politics here, and that of course is one big topic that may come up, but in addition to politics, there are other topics that might come up at the holidays too, which can be equally awkward. So aren't you thinking about having kids? When are you two getting married? Hey, you look like you've lost weight. Are you on Ozempic? How's your bonus looking this year? So this, especially once the alcohol flows, so for all of us who feel like we're going to be in that family situation, come ready with several replies, depending on the situation, that will shut it down. So things like, that's an interesting question. I'm curious why you would ask that. Or, that's an interesting question. I'm not really comfortable speaking about that right now. I hope you understand. Or, if worst comes to worst, a simple, that's interesting, followed by a dead stare, awkward moment of pause, and then you simply change the subject.
Thomas Farley, thank you so much, Mr. Manners, etiquette expert. We appreciate you and happy holidays, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. You as well, Elizabeth.
And set your DVR for tomorrow, Christmas Eve at 8 p.m. Eastern. NewsNation's 1 Hour with George will air for the very first time. George Will on America. His thoughts about where we have been, where we are going, and why he has so much hope for America to deal with some of the toughest issues ahead.
What does it say about the culture that your voice has remained salient, relevant, revered over 50 years?
Well, first of all, as Woody Allen said, 80% of achievement is showing up. And Lord knows I've been showing up a long time. Second, it's really hard to demonstrate that a column or 6,000 columns, approximately what I've written, makes much difference. And that's not bad. We don't want to live in a country in which columnists or newspapermen or the media blow the country about like gusts of wind. We want a stable country that takes its time in coming to conclusions.
Does it change things now that everybody with a Twitter account can be a columnist?
Well, I don't have a Twitter account, so you can be a columnist without one. I'm told I have a Facebook page, but I've never seen it and wouldn't know how to find it. Social media are optional, trust me.
Twitter's not real life.
This too shall pass away.
Well, you wrote about that, right? The accelerated churning of today's capitalism, changing tastes and expanding choices, destroys some jobs and creates others, with net gains in price and quality. But disruption is never restful.
Creative destruction is the essence of capitalism. It is destruction, but it's also creative. We in America like that. That's the point of being a conservative, is to protect the churning, the openness of the future, the sense that anything is possible.
The Supreme Court has a busy year ahead. That would be an understatement, with everything from guns to cartels, possible retirements. What about TikTok? We lay out the possible new laws of the land. When we come back, you don't want to miss it. For teenage girls and maybe teenage boys might be getting a new cell phone for Christmas. They're probably really excited to finally download and use TikTok and then never get off TikTok. But the Supreme Court could be deciding TikTok's fate next month. The court has now agreed to hear the app's appeal to the federal ban that would require someone in the United States to buy the app or face a federal ban. So the app is arguing this is all a violation of the First Amendment right to free speech. It's just one of the many controversial cases the Supreme Court is set to hear over the next few weeks and even longer. Former Deputy Assistant Attorney General under George W. Bush, Tom Dupree, is with us now. He has a Christmas list of all the Supreme Court cases that he's looking forward to in the next year. So, Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I have to start with this TikTok one. I mean, is this a violation of a First Amendment free speech? What do you think?
Well, that's the question the Supreme Court is going to decide. And look, this case is a clash between the First Amendment and national security. I think TikTok and its users have very strong arguments that there are serious First Amendment issues at stake here. On the other hand, the supporters of this law say, look, this is not a First Amendment issue. This is a national security issue, and that China, they say, exerts control over TikTok. And they're saying, look, people can still use TikTok. It's just that they have to sell the company so that it won't be under Chinese ownership. The Supreme Court's going to sort all of this out, and they're going to do so in lightning speed fashion for the Supreme Court. They've agreed to hear it, as you said, right at the beginning of January, and we'll get a decision pretty soon thereafter.
We heard President-elect Donald Trump comment on it just recently. I want to play a quick soundbite for you and get your reaction. So listen here.
You know, I have a warm spot in my heart for TikTok because I won youth by 34 points. And there are those that say that TikTok has something to do with that.
Okay, so I want to get your reaction on that. And also, do the justices have an aptitude for technology? I mean, even I can't really navigate any of this.
Well, on that point, the justices themselves like poking fun at it. They say, is it really appropriate that people of our generation are making these legal decisions on the cutting edge of technology when, you know, for all we know, they're still learning how to use email? But President Trump's point, I think, look, really strikes at the heart of what's going on here, is that there are a lot of people in America who I think do have legitimate national security concerns. But they also love TikTok. They love using it. Their kids use it. Maybe they wish their kids didn't use it as much as they actually use it. But this is going to be a classic case for the Supreme Court where it is going to have to sort out these two competing priorities, the First Amendment and the national security of the United States of America.
Okay, let's move on because we have three other ones that I know you want to talk about. This one involves Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. Not the only case that he's involved with the Supreme Court. This one in particular, he has a lot of support from lawmakers from other states when we're talking about age verification when it comes to access to pornography. This could be groundbreaking.
Yeah, and this is another tricky case. What's going on here is Texas basically is trying to enforce these age verification requirements for internet sites that have, you know, adult content on it. And what some of the users are saying is, look, it's all well and good to restrict kids from accessing this, but these laws and these requirements go too far because they infringe on the adults' First Amendment rights to access this content. So here, too, I think you're going to have a case where the Supreme Court's going to understand that you do have strong First Amendment interests in play. But on the other hand, I think everyone recognizes there's a strong public interest in ensuring that kids don't get access to this stuff on the internet.
Oh, I know. All right, strong public interest. I want to talk about this case involving Smith & Wesson. I really tried to read it and understand some of these nuances here because immediately when you think of Smith & Wesson, you think, oh, that has to deal with gun control. But in this particular instance, we're actually seeing Mexico getting involved, saying that Smith & Wesson knowingly was supplying weapons and it was getting in the hands of cartels, and they weren't doing enough to make sure the serial numbers were tamper-proof. Can you tell me a little bit more about this case? This is really interesting.
It is interesting, and you put your finger on it. What's going on here is Mexico is basically accusing Smith & Wesson and other manufacturers of firearms of being liable for harm that the Mexican government says it suffered as a result of violence being perpetrated by drug cartels in Mexico. And Smith & Wesson's argument is, look, we are not liable for criminals who misuse our lawfully manufactured products, that there's a lot of water that goes under the bridge between the time Smith & Wesson manufactures a firearm and the time that it's used in conjunction with drug cartel violence down in Mexico, and you can't hold us responsible for it. I suspect the Supreme Court here is probably going to be sympathetic to Smith & Wesson's arguments. Congress has said that if this is a lawful product and firearms can be lawfully manufactured in the United States, that you can't impose massive multi-million-dollar liability on them because there are criminals out there who are misusing the products to commit acts of violence.
Okay, so my final case that I want to get to before I ask you a surprise question as we end 2024. Now, this is involving an international dispute. The reason that this caught my attention is because it involved Israel and Palestine. I immediately went back to October 7th, but it dealt with an American who was allegedly murdered back in 2018. So can you explain to me about personal jurisdiction and why this case is so important when it comes to that?
Personal jurisdiction is one of those topics lawyers absolutely love. It basically raises the question of who can be sued in a court in the United States. And what's going on here is the question whether you can have the PLO and the PA, these Palestinian organizations that at least the United States believes is engaged or supporting acts of terrorism, whether or not they can be brought into a court in the United States and held liable. And what people who support this say is that, look, if these individuals or these entities are actually paying bounties to terrorists who murder Americans, that will absolutely, they should be subject to liability in the United States courts. So I think the Supreme Court is really going to have to decide how far the jurisdiction of these courts extends and whether you can, in fact, hold these entities liable and bring them to justice for what they did abroad.
I mean, it's fascinating. Okay, I just want to ask you one last question before I let you go, because we have a new administration coming in. We have a change of party. Some of the justices are getting a little bit older, right? Do you foresee any retirement in the next 4 years?
You know, I am going to say no, but I'm not so sure about that. This is such a personal decision for these justices. Yeah. And when you look at the lineup, you know, there are some who've served on the court for a while. Justice Thomas has been there for a while. Justice Alito has been there for a while. But they clearly love what they do. They're serving a very important role in our nation. And again, you can't force these justices out just because they're getting older. When they decide it's time to go, they will step aside. So my view is always let them make the call. It's not appropriate to bring political pressure to try to force people out before their time. And when the time is right, I'm very, very confident they will do the right thing. And if that means stepping aside at the end of Trump's term to allow Trump to appoint their replacement, so be it.
Yeah, I mean, they agreed to a lifelong term so that they decide, as you noted, when they want to retire. Tom Dupree, unfortunately, we have to retire, but we are so grateful that you joined us with all of your predictions. Obviously, there's a number of blockbuster cases coming up in 2025. But on that note, we thank you, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your 2024. And Cuomo is up next.